The truth is rarely pure and never simple.
Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I would like to talk about 5 classics that are the absolute foundation of the dystopian genre. Let's get to it. The first book on my list is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. It was first published in 1953, and this is set in a world where books are against the law. We follow Guy Montag, who's a firefighter, but in this world, firefighters do not put out fires, but they start them. And that happens anytime when they are alerted to someone owning books. That's a pretty fascinating premise for a book. And this is also a world where house life is dominated by screens, and everyone is mesmerized by what happens in these screens, and they follow these soap operas or the equivalent of soap operas in this world. Does that remind you of anything? Bradbury wrote this novel during the McCarthy era in the United States to warn against the hysteria and the censorship and self-censorship that were so prevalent at the time. Well, this is possibly the my least favorite book in this list of dystopian classics. Given that the writing style is somewhat dry and the plot somewhat predictable to some extent, I still feel this book has a lot to say when it comes to exploration of a lot of the themes it covers, especially in the context of social media and mass media that are so dominant in our daily lives. And also when it comes to the cult of celebrities and notion of cancel culture that has risen to prominence in recent times. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley takes place in a world where human beings are no longer born the traditional way, which is found repulsive, but rather they're grown in artificial wombs. Everybody's genetic pool is also engineered so that their place in society is predetermined and unchangeable. And no one really questions their place in society because the state gives everybody a drug called soma, which gives everybody a sense of happiness and contentedness with their situation, which allows the status quo to continue. Recreational sex is also heavily encouraged and is no longer tied to the notion of reproduction, which is entirely separate. But we also see the contrast with this dystopian/utopian society versus a more traditional way of life, which is still kept alive by so-called savages, who live in separate communities. Even though this is the oldest book on this list, as it was published in the 1930s, it's very remarkable how ahead of his time Huxley was, and how a lot of the themes he explores are still so relevant today. And even though personally I find some aspects of the book might not have aged particularly well, it still remains an absolute must-read for all lovers of the dystopian genre. This is the most recent book on this list, as it was published in 1985. This is set in a country called Gilead, which evolved from a version of the United States where religious extremists took power. It's a society and a world where sterility has become a widespread issue, and where women are strictly put into social classes based on their status, but crucially on their reproductive ability. One of these classes is that of the handmaids, which are being used to give birth to babies, who are then given to families of higher status. Even the names of the handmaids are determined based on the man they're assigned to. So in this case, we follow Offred, whose real name we never really find out. We're told about her daily life, as well as getting glimpses of what her previous life was before Gilead, in the form of her diaries. While the story moves a bit slowly and the writing is a bit grim and dry, and it might not be everybody's taste, the exploration of the themes and the originality of the world Atwood has set up really makes it feel very relevant today, and it's another must-read for the lovers of this genre. I've also read The Testaments, which is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which only came out a couple of years ago and even won the Booker Prize. While the Testaments is a much easier read, it's a lot faster paced, there's more of a plot, and it's definitely more enjoyable in a way. The depth of the two books is on two completely different levels, in my opinion, and I definitely don't see the Testaments becoming another classic. The Man in the High Castle is a book by Philip K. Dick published in 1962 and set in a universe where the Axis won the Second World War and where the United States were partitioned between Germany on the East Coast and Japan on the West Coast as a consequence. There's also a buffer zone, a neutral zone in between, where some of the story takes place. As you might expect, there's an element of resistance as well to this new regime. And in particular, a book called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, where an alternative universe is described, a universe that looks very much like our own, and that becomes a symbol of this resistance. The description of this alternative world is incredibly believable, and it goes down to details about the technology and the mentality of the people living in this world. And for that alone, this book is a must read, in my opinion. The plot itself is slightly less satisfying than perhaps other books with similar setups. And there's also an element of magical realism that's introduced in the story. But nevertheless, I would highly recommend this book. It's impossible to have a list of dystopian classics without mentioning the big daddy of the genre. 1984 was first published in 1949, and is set in a world where government surveillance is widespread. And it's also a world where we have a thought police who can make everyone disappear at will if they do not conform with a party narrative or if they question the status quo in any way. It's also a world where the state overreaches and controls all sides of society, including personal relationships, and where history keeps being rewritten and manipulated to suit the narrative of the regime. And we follow the adventures of Winston Smith, who's in secret thinking of rebelling. This is a perfect example of a book that's taken a life of its own and gone way beyond the initial intention of its author. We know that Orwell was particularly preoccupied with the USSR and Stalinism in particular, and wanted to warn against the dangers of a takeover of that ideology. And that was heavily influenced by his experience in the Spanish Civil War. However, over the years, 1984 has become a symbol for any concerns around government overreach and state surveillance and the danger of government propaganda. A lot of the themes covered in the book still feel incredibly relevant today, and for that reason, this is another must-read. However, the pace of the book, as well as some of the things happening in the book and the style, the writing style, might be challenging for some people. And if that is the case, I'm definitely going to mention Animal Farm, which is a lot more approachable and way easier to get through, but still a very deep and meaningful read. And I would definitely highly recommend that as well. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And please let me know down in the comments if you read these books, what you thought of them, and if you have any other dystopian classic that you would recommend. Thank you very much, and I'll see you the next time.